wrenched. I'm going to introduce SHAN now. Some of you will have met her already. SHAN McLennan has the dream job. She's currently Creative Director of Learning and Participation at the South Bank Centre, where she leads a multidisciplinary team and is responsible for free programming, archives and collections, as well as education and participatory work. And as with all the biogs, I'm not going to read it all because it's all in your book. But we've really just met, and I must say a special thank you to SHAN, because when it turned out that Jude and I had mixed up our dates, SHAN was really just thrown into it and said, well, SHAN will do my Friday afternoon stint. And so she's had very little time, and I know that she's been working really hard to give us a good experience. So thank you very much, and welcome.
Thanks so much, and I must just also just express my appreciation for that presentation of Andrew's. It was just inspiring, and I was going to talk a bit about South Bank Centre being a learning organisation, and looking at that and thinking of what Tamsin was saying about our own gallery experience, I realised how much we have got to learn. So it's been worth coming all this way just to hear that, and many other things besides, but thank you so much. So yes, I think most people put their hands up when Judith asked if they'd heard Jude yesterday. But I thought I'd just orientate just briefly my role and Tamsin's in relation to Jude, because well, we have the great honour, of course, of working with Jude at South Bank Centre, and we are the way I'm going to explain it is we're her translators, if you like. We listen and we translate and we develop some of those ideas that she was talking about yesterday, and many more besides, and make them into things that people can touch and feel and experience, which is a roller coaster. And I'll take you through some pictures that demonstrate that roller coaster. But I guess South Bank Centre has stopped calling itself an arts centre, started calling itself a cultural centre. Is it also a centre of politics, of a centre for living, a centre for changing the world, the festival that we're doing at the moment? And it's very kind of Judith to let me off the hook, but I've just been producing a huge festival about how to change the world, no less. So these are the questions, you know, are we an engine that will change what's possible for people in the world? Not just an arts centre, whatever. I wanted to just talk, before showing you some of images of the work that Tamsin and I are engaged in, just wanted to talk about the urgency of creativity, how creativity has urgent purpose in the world. And when we get back to the UK next week, we will be throwing ourselves into a visit from the Simon Bolivar Symphony Orchestra of Venezuela. And I don't know if this is an organisation that's familiar to you, but 33 years ago in Caracas in Venezuela, there was an economist called Jose Antonio Abreu, who, in going about his daily work, became increasingly appalled to the point of having to take action about the poverty that he saw around him, and the way that the children he was seeing in the streets had no way to aspire to anything, because they had no opportunity through which to think about a future in which they had a meaningful role. And he, I mean, it's very surprisingly, really, given that he lived in South America, turned to his own special interest, which was Western classical music, European classical music, basically, and decided that he would use that as the engine to, or the tool to give to those children to think about the world in a different way. And he bought 13 musical instruments, and he took 13 children into the only space he could find, which was an old garage in Caracas, and taught them how to play music. And the rest, as they say, is history, because 33 years later, the system of music education that he was founding, although I don't think even he knew it at the time, El Sistema, has produced hundreds of thousands of young musicians in Venezuela, and a national confidence which was a million miles away when he began that work. As a byproduct, he's produced one of the great world orchestras. I was just saying to someone earlier, they were called the Simon Bolivar Youth Orchestra because they were children when they began. They're in their 30s now then, but they're traveling the world as one of the great symphony orchestras. And Gustavo Dudamel, their conductor, is one of the great conductors. He's just taken up a residency with the Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra. But it began with a sense that children in Caracas were disenfranchised to the point of non-existence, if you like. And with some audacity, I think, you just want to use a quote from Abreu to introduce my principal idea today, which is about giving children power. And I'm slightly paraphrasing, but Abreu said, socially, inclusion is the basic principle. For the disenfranchised, the best tools, the best teachers, the best infrastructure. Culture for the disenfranchised cannot be disadvantaged culture. It should be large, ambitious, refined, advanced, not scraps. I mean, I think what Andrew's just shown us is exactly that, but I think that's a good place to start. You know, it has to be huge. You know, when I started working at Southbank Centre more years ago than I care to recall, I was an education officer and I did my work sort of almost in secret, you know, made my own leaflets, you know, was allowed to put on a performance at 3:10 on a Tuesday when of course nobody was going to come. And I'm in the extraordinary position now, along with Tamsin and other colleagues, because I work for someone like Jude, where I'm an executive director of the organisation, and I can say, actually, let's forget, you know, all those things we used to do, and let's put children in charge. So that's what I'm going to talk about. I've given you a long preamble. I was at a talk by the children's author, David Almond, a couple of years ago now. He wrote Skellig. I don't know if you know his work. He's an extraordinary writer. And he came late to writing. He was a teacher. And following his reading, there was a discussion among the young people who were there. They were aged between about 10 and 12. And I'd had a particularly sort of challenging morning. I've been listening to the news, you know, the wearisomeness of watching politicians not sorting things out. And then there was this incredible discussion following David Almond's talk where I really felt, you know, and I mean, obviously everyone in this room agrees with this, but I thought, well, if these children were in charge, you know, if they were just running things, the world would be definitely different, definitely better, I think. I mean, these things have been talked about already in the last few days, but children are enthusiastic, passionate. They have an incredibly strong sense of justice, fair play. They are urgently playful. You know, they have to get on with playing. They are optimistic. They're accepting of difference. All these things that adults sometimes, you know, we find them hard. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Loris Malaguzzi, an extraordinary Italian educator who runs a school in a place called Reggio Emilia. He says children have 100 languages when they're born. They can talk about the world in 100 different ways, but by the time they leave secondary school, they can only speak their own native language. They've had everything stripped away. And he set about making that different. So I'm going to move on to my pictures. I'm going to just tell you a bit about the ideological permission, if you like, for trying to change the world on the Southbank Centre site. And then I'm going to give you a series of stories of things that we've tried to do at Southbank Centre to give freedom to children and to make them key stakeholders in what we do. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about our Children's Festival, which is our Out of the Box, which happens annually at the moment, but shortly to be quarterly. And I'm going to tell you a secret. Following Jude's sort of instruction I felt to me yesterday from this stage, she said, if you say something in public, you've got to do it. So I'm going to end with making a pledge that I've then got to go back to London and do. My daughter's here with us. Some of you might have met her. But she absolutely delighted at the end of the Out of the Box celebrations on 2 days running has taken to the stage, the Out of the Box, the underage stage, and created her own performance in which she makes all kinds of gestures and promises about what she wants audiences to experience from her and understand from her. If you said to children, as we've done every now and again, okay, you programme the South Bank Centre, what could they put on? We'll come back to a bit about these two particular young men. But here's just a little gallery. That picture was painted by a 9-year-old in 1944, so quite a long time ago. Here's some children singing en masse in the Royal Festival Hall. Here's an exhibition by children being enjoyed by adults. Another, I think, extraordinary artwork, just still painted during the Second World War, of an Anderson shelter. Here's an outdoor performance at the Royal Festival Hall. It's a version of Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner. One of those things, and I don't know if it's a poem that you teach here in Australia, but it's one of those ones in the UK, so it'll be far too difficult for children to understand. And yet the several hundred children who made this performance all knew it by heart by the end, even though it's incredibly long. There's more artwork. So there's plenty of work. I mean, that's just a tiny, tiny little fragment that if children were putting themselves on, if you like, not putting grown-ups on, they could do. And on our site, which, you know, Jude was describing yesterday, is huge. Those opportunities are endless, really. The Festival of Britain, very interesting. You know, I just listed, you know, rather mundanely, some of those characteristics of children. The Festival of Britain was a moment in British history when grown-ups behaved like children. There'd been, you know, a war across the world. Europe was in pieces, Britain was in pieces. And a group of young people, not children, but young people, decided that they had to imagine the future. And what they decided to do was to make a festival in Britain, which would involve all of Britain, and it really did involve all of Britain. And they were untroubled by branding and corporates and all the things that, you know, just thinking about the Olympics at the moment, the things that trouble us nowadays. And they went to the least loved part of London on the south bank of the Thames, and they built a fantasy world. It was called by the Observer newspaper a brief city. They built a town that had houses and shops and cultural facilities that were unlike any that had ever been seen. They built this extraordinary sculpture, the Skylon, and famously said it doesn't do anything. It has no purpose. It doesn't mean anything. It's got no hidden depth. It's just there. And they said, come and look at it. I mean, that was an incredible concept in Britain at that time. And these people, it took me a long time to discover this, but these people and the little girl and maybe her parents are watching a balloon release, which happened every day during this festival in the summer of 1951, which gave tickets to people who caught a balloon to come and experience this festival. The site was huge, and it was covered in futuristic buildings. The only one that's left is the Royal Festival Hall. But those that went, and I've had the privilege of meeting quite a lot, I feel as if I went myself, although I'm not quite old enough, but never forgot it. But the terrible thing that happened when this exhibition that had been made with all these characteristics, this urgent creativity and optimism and belief in the future, the government changed just as the exhibition was open. And they were frightened of that degree of imagination. You know, what would people imagine if they could imagine? So they literally set bulldozers into that site, and they bulldozed it apart from the Royal Festival Hall. And there was then a period of forgetting, you know, a forgetting that if we became like children, we could have imagined a world that it would have been worth fighting for, all those people who had fought in the Second World War. They left this, the Royal Festival Hall, and now, you know, as I've been saying, under Jude's leadership, there has been this extraordinary process of remembering and of obligation about how to occupy and use that site, and of who has the right and who should be given the authority to run that site. And absolutely central to that thinking is the idea of children. Now, this is not rhetoric. I mean, I looked at Andrew's presentation and felt, you know, gosh, I said at the beginning, we've got a long way to go, but it's not rhetoric. And we have taken time to look around the world at places where children have seized power and made artistic contributions and cultural difference. This photograph is from Project Merino, which is a project in one of the poorest favelas in Rio de Janeiro. And I don't know if any of you have ever been to a favela in Rio, but people make the houses with their own hands. You know, they use the materials that come to hand around them. And in this favela, the children there don't have very much to play with at all. You know, so I look at what my children play with, what they've had, and goodness me. But I've been to this favela and they don't have anything. And two little boys, aged about 10 and 11, about 12 years ago now, decided that they would make their own playground. And they gathered together bricks that hadn't been used for house building, and tiny, tiny things, fragments of string and paper. And they carried them, physically carried them, to a space above the favela, and they made a fantasy city. And that city had things in it that they knew existed but didn't experience, like hospitals and banks and department stores. And they kept on making it. So all the children who came after them all contributed to this extraordinary thing. And it's become something of a phenomenon. It's been at the Venice Biennale now, a version of this. We brought it to South Bank Centre. We were talking earlier about healing. There's been riots in London, you know, quite recently, that seem to be born of this sense that young people don't know where they're going and who they are. And we brought Project Merino and introduced them to people living in London and said, let's make something together. And they did make something beautiful for the South Bank. But more important than what they made was the fact that they met each other. And those boys, you know, they were sort of just pre-secondary school at the time that they began the project. They're in their early 20s now, but they've got all the other children following behind them, so a bit like Venezuela. And the impact, I mean, I don't know, you know, again, I hate sort of to blind people with statistics, but the site that we placed this work in, which these children had created over all this time, during a summer period, we get about 8.2 million visitors walking past it. One of our national newspapers, The Guardian, was following this, and we had about 2 visitors every second looking at it. So the sense that these boys had gone from their own community to being, you know, the real agents of change in a completely different place was absolutely palpable. And I'm struggling for words slightly, because it wasn't that they were suddenly visible and famous. It was that the concept that creativity could make meaning of your life was suddenly available to other people. And it's very like that, the Matisse, the drawing studio. It was people thinking, I get that, actually. You know, I get that it's not really just about sitting in a theatre or looking at a painting on a wall. It's about making this a palpable thing, an experiential thing that can make me in touch with who I am and who I am politically in the world. And this is another project. I'm going far too slowly through these pictures, so I'll have to speed up. But this is another extraordinary project in Nepal. There's a movement called Room 13, which again we're very interested in at South Bank Centre, and a project we work with, where in schools you've got, you know, the different rooms that do all the different things in the school, and then you've got Room 13, and that's the room where the children take over and they do what they want. And this is a Room 13 in Nepal, which is an outdoor school. Near Bath in England, near London, there's a Room 13 which is run by a committee of children. They do paintings, they sell them, They use the money to buy more materials. They make souvenirs, postcards, pencils, pencil sharpeners. And they're completely in charge. And they don't want to be artists. You know, I mean, this is a very interesting thing to me. The little boy who's 11, who was the chairman of Room 13 in Bath until very recently, is a wonderful, gifted artist, actually. You know, and it's not really in my job description to look for gifted children, although you kind of find them, don't you, sometimes. And I said, "Oh, are you going to be an artist? You know, And he said, "No." And he said, "I'm going to be a doctor. You know, I've learnt through doing this that I'm going to be a doctor." You know, so this experience of art had given him the confidence, if you like, to feel that he could be anything. And, you know, I won't keep saying this because it gets tedious, but, you know, that child came from one of the poorest estates in one of the poorest bits of Britain to do and came out of it feeling that he could have a real role in society, one that would be respected, you know, in the conventional sense. That's Room 13 in Africa. They're all over the place now. It's potent, isn't it, this? You know, these ideas. Venezuela that I was mentioning at the beginning, you know, everyone wants to do it. Everyone who hears about it wants to copy it and do it. So, takeover. Just to go back to the two little boys at the beginning, I'm going to let Tamsin talk more about this when she is next with you, because this is Tamsin's idea, and it's a great idea. You know, Tamsin leads on our Imagine Festival, and we suddenly felt a great embarrassment. You know, I mean, I'm 50, you know, me sort of saying welcome to lots of children. I mean, you know, what would I know? I'm an old lady. And Tamsin said, we need children to do it. And so that's what we've been doing for the last couple of years at Imagine. We've been very forensically training children to take over the South Bank Centre. And it's been very, very good for the South Bank Centre. Because again, you know, when I was first there, people were frightened of children. You know, a memo used to go around saying, there'll be children in the building, you know, maybe you will want to, you know, take a day off sort of thing. But suddenly, people with children, you know, it's like Jude was saying yesterday, how often do you actually get to meet a child who isn't your child or your, you know, your grandchild or your niece or nephew and so on. But, you know, they're great children, you know, and when they take your coat or they show you round, all those qualities that I was observing at the beginning are all right there in your face. You know, they're charming, they're helpful, they're dying to share with you. I had a comment from a little boy a couple of weeks ago who'd been involved in one of these initiatives, and he said, can't I just sleep here? I don't want to go home, I just want to stay, you know, I want to be here all the time. So taking tickets, being at the box office, there's a whole group with their adult counterparts at South Bank Centre. But you can see everyone's smiling, you know, as I say, there was a moment, and Tamsin can tell you about it, you know, a real kind of discussion with HR about, you know, even sort of almost funny, thinking, oh, were we, you know, was it child labour, and were we stopping adults having jobs, you know, all this kind of stuff, and yet in the end we all felt better for doing it, and we all made such a, you know, it's so simple and yet so completely obvious. Another project. This next bit of my pictures is a sort of case study. But again, Jude referred to this yesterday, but I've presided over many school visits. Now, I have the feeling that Andrew's institution doesn't do these kinds of school visits, but I've seen in British institutions many school visits where children arrive in a crocodile with their packed lunches, and their teachers, who are experts, sort of forget that they're with them almost. They say, we're here, and we'll watch a concert, but we'll just sort of hand them over to the arts organisation, and now you can get on with it, and it's really troubled me, this, because A, I'm not a teacher. I mean, I've worked in arts education all my life, but I've never been a teacher, and B, I don't know the children who arrive at South. I don't know them. I don't know what troubles them, what makes them happy, what's happening in their life. I don't know them, and I felt really worried about it. And I felt, what model could we create where the experience that I have and my colleagues have joins with the experiences of teachers to make a new kind of educational experience that is not a school trip, if you like. And we came up with this idea of primary school in residence. And the first one we did was a month long, and it was a year 4 class, which is 8 rising 9, so they were all, and they came for a month, and they did all their learning at Southbank Centre. So they arrived at their own school in the morning, but then they came straight to us, so they were with us by about 9:30. They brought with them their teachers, so when they were doing their maths and their physics and their geology, and they did it at Southbank Centre, but they used the cultural space. You know, I've shown you the map of the 21 acres to learn. So we've got fossils on our roof, and we've got a river that has things growing in it and living in it, and we do put on music, and so they did all their learning with us, and it became a very potent moment. You know, they had playtime, you know, in our foyers, so suddenly you got that lovely buzz, you know, when children go out to play and you hear it in a foyer that might have been quiet or empty, suddenly is a children's playground. And we've done it lots of times now. Lots and lots of times. And in fact, we're partnering with another institution, the Egg in Bath, which is a children's theatre. And I've got this very grand title I'm called the Industry Mentor, because I've helped Bath now to work with a primary school who are there all the time. They do all their learning at this theatre. So just to quickly go through this one, this was one of the residencies. It ended up calling itself Feel the Beat of London Life. So just very quickly engage and inspire staff, a new way of working with primary schools that's two-way, empowering teachers to be experts, embedding arts in school, children developing a sense of belonging and ownership over community spaces. I mean, that's another thing. It's boring to talk about money, but the people of Britain own the Southbank Centre. It's just that simple. They own it. I'm a public servant, you know, so if they can't come, then that's a problem. Children to see value in the arts and lifelong memories. Here they are. There's our carpet that Jude showed you a picture yesterday, our famous carpet. There's learning everywhere, you know, that carpet even, you know, you can see the geometric pattern. You see it's got a ball on it. It's called the net and ball. When that was being designed, it was just the net. And one of the designers put an orange onto it and said it'll look better with an orange. And now it's got a, you know, you can learn. Every little bit of the building's got something you can learn. So this particular project, they had a 7-week residency. They spent 2 days a week. They worked in our poetry library with our gamelan, etc., etc. You get the picture. They did all these things. They had an exhibition at school. They made an exhibition for us. There they are looking at the river. Here they are making their film. There's a terrible photograph, actually, but their exhibition, which was in one of our public foyers, was absolutely beautiful. You know, so everyone who came had to look at it. And then there's just a bit of feedback from them. You know, it's gone so quickly. I can't wait to take, oh dear, I can't wait to take my mum. Oh, what's happening? Something's happening. Nothing's better. You know, I mean, just to be very clear, we're not doing this to get that feedback. It's a shared enterprise about making the place meaningful, if you like. Now this one, this is, my technology failed me. This was to have been an audio to show you that we now often work with children to, I don't like this word, but to create product for the rest of our audiences. So one of our primary schools in residence made a tour of an audio guide to the festival hall for other children to use. I wanted to play you a bit of it, but I've not been able to. But that model of engaging children as the creators of content is one that we do again and again. And in fact, this is a case in point, and this is, oh, I keep losing my pictures. There's a primary school, well, it's an infant school actually, in Hounslow in London, which is under the flight path of Heathrow. So they have planes coming from all over the world all the time and leaving all the time. And on the one hand, that's exciting, you know, people coming from places like Australia to London and people going from London to Australia and so on. But it's also quite noisy. And these children began a project to work to create a playground that was inhabitable by them when all these planes were coming and going. And they worked with an organisation called Small Earth to transform their playground into a magical environment. And we met them, and wanting, as I was just saying, to encourage children to feel a sense of ownership at Southbank Centre, invited them to create one of the key installations for our big festival of the world, the one that I've just been working on at Southbank Centre. And they did. And they decided that they wanted to base their environment for Southbank Centre on the idea of the Adobe hut. Small Earth are architects who work in disaster areas. So they go to places where there's been a tsunami or an earthquake, and they work with local communities to rebuild houses and so on. This is one of the children's models, his work in progress. The children, there's another one. The children came to Southbank Centre on site visits. Again, they did masses of, if you like, conventional learning using our buildings. They made model boxes, they made panoramic drawings, they made sound recordings. This is one of the buildings they've made for us, and it's absolutely beautiful. And the first day that it was open, which was about 2 weeks ago now, we had a sunny day. We've had terrible weather, but it was a sunny day. It was absolutely covered in people. And it had been made, you know, pure and simple out of the imagination of these children. And so somehow, even without a label or a catalogue, it feels different. You know, it feels different than if we'd made it. And there they are, that's them on site working. And then just a couple of tiny other things just about content. The Book Lounge, an exhibition that went alongside Poetry International, which is a biannual festival that we have at the South Bank. One of our main foyer areas was made on a number of years running by children. So again, a bit like the Matisse drawing room, it wasn't for children, but it was made by children. But by being made by children, it was made a much more, a greatly richer experience for everybody. I mean, it's a bit like, you know, if you can get somewhere with a pushchair, then everyone can get there easier. I mean, that's just a fact, actually. If you make somewhere accessible by pushchairs or people who use wheelchairs, it's better for absolutely everybody. So it's that sort of principle. And there's another installation in the same space, inspired by the Skylon, actually, that I showed you earlier. So just to tell you a little bit about our Out of the Box, just because I guess we haven't talked about that. Imagine is a festival. We've been doing it for over 10 years now, and it began as a literature festival, but now we do all kinds of things. And you won't be surprised to hear that although it began as kind of events for children, where you bought tickets and you came, and it was often, to be honest, people like me with children like mine buying the tickets and going, it's changing into a festival which is more thoughtful and which allows children to think more about the world and about how life is for children in other communities and other countries. We do loads of events, though. We still do that. We did more than 50 this year. Tamsin has worked so hard to put all that together. Readings, orchestral performances, opera. I mean, I will just say, in terms of orchestral performances, the Philharmonia Orchestra, who are one of 2 symphony orchestras resident at Southbank Centre, accepted an invitation to have children singing alongside them. I mean, that sounds a very simple thing, but it was a big deal. The consequence was that many families came who wouldn't have come. I mean, it's almost too obvious to say, but if your child's taking part in something, even if you're completely culturally disenfranchised, then you turn up for it. And so some other possibilities open up. We had unusual events. This performer, Beastie, arrives in a box. Children unpack him and take him for a walk. We had another incredible show, The Incredible Book-Eating Boy, which was a one-person show where some of you might have seen it, but it's a wonderful little theatrical set where only one child can go in, so no grown-ups allowed. You know, you go in. I did go in on my own, pretending to be a child. It's just magical, but the sense that everything has to be mediated by someone. We're trying to kind of say, no, you don't need a grown-up anywhere near you. We'll be there to be the supporters and the protectors, but you don't really need us. And there's the Philharmonia that I was just mentioning. And, you know, we're very lucky because all the great names do want to be at Southbank Centre. And as Tamsin was saying earlier, you know, they do want to be with children. You know, children, when you really get down to it, are, you know, some of the best people to be around. We made a new show. We commissioned a new show. Again, a bit like Andrew was saying, we did R&D with local young children to make a show based on Dennis the Menace, who's a much-loved cartoon character from a comic called The Beano. So what are we going to do next? this is where the surprise bit comes in. I mean, we are going to become more and more and more a place that doesn't put things on for children, but that is made by children, where we do put things on, or they put things on. But everything that we do is going to reflect that. I mean, I said at the beginning, it sounds maybe it's a funny way of putting it, but I personally now, with the role that I have a say in how South Bank Centre is run, how it spends its money, how it deploys the money it receives from taxation in the UK. And I can say it has to be spent by 5-year-olds, and I can be heard. You know, that is a very, very big shift for an institution in the UK to feel that that is a possibility. It's exhilarating, you know, for me. I'm so lucky, but with that luck, whatever, comes the fact that we're so visible, because we're so huge and we're so busy, that a lot of other people are watching. So there is a hope, you know, that they'll copy, or they'll feel we're going to do the same. Because actually, how did we ever manage without having, you know, children running their own festival? How did we do that? How did that happen? And we have a lot of fun. We do have an awful lot of fun. I sometimes get accused of being too sort of worthy, because I've spent a lifetime, you know, being worthy and campaigning about some of these things. But we do have an awful lot of fun. But the final thing I want to say is my own pledge, which is Jude talked yesterday about our new capital development, which is the buildings next to the festival hall, that after the horrendous vandalism of the bulldozing of the Festival of Britain, in the 60s some new buildings were put up, which had their own ideology attached to them. They were created by, again, a very sort of progressive young architectural group called Archigram. But again, they've been neglected. And we're going to make those new spaces through some of these ideas that I've been talking to you about urgent international creativity, children, etc., etc. But we're going, the thing I want to sort of pledge and say in a very literal way is that we are going to do it for real. So what we're not going to do is commission hotshot architects to make buildings into which we then invite children. We're going to make them absolutely part of how we do it. You know, whether it's the Hounslow children literally building the thing, or whether it's ideas, or whether it's briefing architects and so on and so on. And for next year's Imagine, I said at some point, you know, I'm a pragmatist. We're going to demonstrate how we can transform a space. Because, you know, if I literally went to the whole of the South Bank this afternoon and said, oh, children are going to build the new development, you know, well, I'd be lying if I didn't say some people would say, oh, come on, you know, no, you know, enough's enough. But we're going to demonstrate that this is possible in next year's Imagine by inhabiting one of the spaces that's ripe for transformation, using these methods so that we can say, look, it wasn't so bad. You know, in fact, it was pretty good, wasn't it, when they took charge and were in control. And I hope, you know, it's such a long way to London, but if any of you feel like coming to see that, or we can Skype it back, then you'd be most welcome, because we are going to do that. I'm looking at Tamsin, but we've just built a new space for staff and artists as part of Fest of the World. There was huge scepticism, but we have built it. And there's a couple of people here who've seen it, but we are going to do it with children next. So I think I've run out of time, I guess. But thank you so much for accepting me as Jude's stand-in on a Friday afternoon. But it's such a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. Oh, a few more little pictures. Thanks.
And we absolutely couldn't have had it more perfectly curated. We had the big vision from Jude yesterday and the application today. So it was not a stand-in, it was inspirational. Thank you very much, Shan.